We all know what Master Chief is capable of, but what if he never got his driver's license? Would it be possible for the Master Chief to finish the fight? Well, Luke and I are here to find out if you can complete any of the 7 mainline Halo games without driving or flying a vehicle. Is this something that is even possible? Well, today we're gonna find out. We did have a few rules, however. For this video, we're gonna be testing both driving and flying separately. If driving and flying are both required to proceed, then the run is dead and we'll move on to the next game to save time. And in cases where the game forces you into a vehicle, that is okay as long as you jump out immediately. Otherwise, we're going all in trying to see which Halo game you can possibly beat without using a vehicle. First up, we're taking a look at Halo Combat Evolved to start this whole entire run off. We already know the last level is going to give us some trouble, but let's see if we can even get there first. The level Halo is the first level that you encounter a Warthog in the entire Halo franchise, and honestly, this one is quite a hike if you choose not to do the Warthog, but outside of a little grenade jump that you have to use to cross the inside area of the tunnel, you can complete this level without walking, and there's even an achievement in the Master Chief Collection for doing so. On the Silent Cartographer, you can easily skip the driving section as it's all optional, and if you go left first, you actually skip a large portion of this level, making it much easier than if you had to drive around the correct way. Then we got to Assault on the Control Room, and this was one of the ones we were the most concerned about jumping into this because it's such a long level and there's a lot of different vehicles. However, you can actually walk your way through the entire canyon on foot and not have to rely on a Warthog or a tank, making this run still good to go. However, when we got to the level 2 betrayals, we ran into a serious problem as this level heavily requires the use of Banshees, and essentially you have to fly really high up to get to the inside section of this level. But without getting in the Banshee, is it even possible to get very far? What we ended up doing was trying to find a way where we could maybe get up on the cliffside and utilize different jumping strategies like grenade jumps to get as high as possible. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to get up, so we ended up walking up the middle barrier and trying to see if it was possible to grenade jump across to land on the snow bridge, which was kind of a major crossing point on Assault on the Control Room. Fortunately enough, after a few tries, we did make it up onto the middle platform, but there wasn't really anywhere else we could go. We did try using different grenade jumps to climb up on the door entrances, and we even got as far as climbing up all the way up onto the canyon ridge, but despite us having the motivation and hopes and dreams of making it up to that first point that we had to get to for this level, there was just no way that we could find a practical or realistic way to launch ourselves up the 80 or so meters we still had to go if we were going to somehow hit the first objective. Let alone the rest of this level is also very dependent on Banshees, so it wasn't looking too likely that you can complete Halo 1 without using a flying vehicle. But we still wanted to know if you could get through the rest of this game without using any ground vehicles, and let us just use flying vehicles here. Pretty much after playing through 2 betrayals, there's only one more level left that even has vehicles that play a major role, and that's the Maw, which essentially is the famous Warthog run from Halo 1. Now, we did a huge video detailing the amount of work that went into questioning whether or not this could even be possible, and after we really tested it out, we found that yes, you can complete the Warthog run on foot. However, with the timer that is in place, it's actually not possible to beat the entirety of the run within the 6 minutes allotted. Had you had more time, you could complete it on foot. However, since there isn't any real practical way to do this entire run, plus the parkour you have to do to get through the middle section, seriously, it is insane. You should check out our video if you haven't already. This run is dead in the water, meaning Halo 1 cannot be completed without a driving vehicle or a flying vehicle. But what about Halo 2? Will we have better luck? For this one, as you're watching our footage and see us flying around, we did put on a ton of random skulls just to make the run of this a little more fun. Starting off, we went on to Outskirts, which is pretty easy. It's kind of fun to explore this level, and we always got really sidetracked whenever we do anything on this level. But we did make our way through this entire level, and honestly, the worst part is the tunnels, just because it's a very long walk, and it's easy to kind of get bored and try throwing grenades. Just make sure you don't get run over in the process. process. Moving forward to Metropolis, it's another level that's kind of focused on driving, and honestly, other than just getting bored walking across a really long bridge and having a lot of enemies that are trying to constantly kill you, this level isn't too hard either. It's just a really long walk. I mean, you have to cross a bridge, walk through a tunnel, go through a courtyard, walk down some streets, and finally you can make it to the Scarab, which is just a regular part of the game, and you can clear this level without walking relatively easily. Then we got to the Arbiter, and this was a level we knew we could possibly have some serious problems with. Essentially, when you get to the part where you have to jump in the Banshee, we kind of ran into the first thing that really stumped us more than anything we saw in Halo 1. As we approached the Banshees, we knocked them off to make sure that we didn't get tempted to fly away, and then we kind of realized we might have gotten stuck. We know that this level kind of serves as some sort of Phantom escort level, so our next goal was to maybe try to jump on the Phantom. And even with all of the skulls that we had on, we never could really find a way to land on the Phantom, and we just couldn't seem to make it work by just doing a regular grenade jump or a buddy jump. This was super discouraging as we had only just got into Halo 2, and to already have the flying section being ruled out, it was pretty discouraging. But then we came up with something else that could maybe work and get us a little closer to beating this level without using a Banshee. We backtracked a little bit going back inside and realized that we could try pushing the boxes from inside the room all the way through the hallway and out the door. Now, since we had the feather skull on, it made it pretty hard to maneuver these boxes, and we tried way too long trying to push the boxes through the door, and we kind of hoped that RNG would let us get it through. Finally, after a long trial of just hoping that the box would take the right shape, we realized that if you used plasma pistols to shoot the box, it actually would slightly push it forward. So then we went ahead and spent a ton of time shooting the boxes with plasma pistols, just trying to hit it in the right spot and get it through without necessarily getting it stuck. This honestly took us so long, but we were determined to try to land on top of that Phantom and see if that could trigger the next section of this level. Finally, after getting this box out there, we took the leap of faith, and it didn't work. After getting close to giving up on this run, we decided to reset the checkpoint one more time to have the Banshees respawn like they were there in the beginning, and we started off trying to just throw grenades at the Phantom, hoping that maybe it would trigger it to move. Still, we had no luck with that. So finally, as a last resort, we tried jumping in the Banshees for 1 second, jumping out immediately after using our quick jump rule we already established, and since technically it doesn't count as driving or flying, we're going to say that this is okay, but because we did this, it triggered the Phantom to actually move forward, some awesome music started playing, and it deactivated a death barrier that we constantly kept running into in the next section. So we were feeling pretty good, and we were hopeful that the Banshee would just go through, clear the enemies, and the end of the level would trigger. However, as we continued to wait and more time passed, we realized that it wouldn't be the case. The level really waits on players to take out the enemies blocking the exit area where you have to land, and the game won't trigger the final section of the level unless you're in a Banshee nearby the Phantom and you trigger the final section of the level. And there was nothing we could do here, which at the end of the day, and after all of this trial and error, the Arbiter killed the Halo 2 run for flying vehicles. But we still had to answer the question if we could complete Halo 2 without using any ground vehicles. We already knew that Delta Halo is one of those levels that has vehicles, but there's achievements related to completing it without getting in a vehicle, so this one was no problem. Quarantine Zone is one of those crazy vehicle levels, and honestly, it's pretty chaotic, but as long as you run through it and not get lost by the level design or completely obliterated by a vehicle trying to run you over, you'll be pretty okay. Moving on to Uprising, this is another driving level, but there's a huge, massive skip on this level that you can do just by running out of bounds, so this one's easy to do without a vehicle. And then we got to the Great Journey. Now, of course, this level's intended for you to do it with a Banshee, and there's also some other parts where you're supposed to be in a Wraith and a Spectre, but for the sake of this run and our curiosity, we wanted to see if we could just do it on foot. When you get to the final section of this level where you have to clear the way for the Scarab. We just ran through it on foot, taking out the Wraiths as we could and dodged the Banshees that were constantly firing on us. We cut to the right where the level normally veers off where you would get in a Banshee, and went up the route where a lot of players go when they're looking for the hidden items on this level. Fortunately enough though, if you cut low and you avoid the steep parts of the cliff, you can actually leap across using the skulls we have, or we also tested walking it the legit way, and sure enough, you can get to the entrance without flying a Banshee or entering a vehicle. So technically, you can complete all of Halo 2 without a ground vehicle, however, you are required to fly a Banshee to complete the game. So Halo 2 was a little bit more successful than Halo 1, but we still haven't found that perfect Halo game that lets you beat the entirety of it without stepping in a vehicle. Halo 3 was next, and this one was one that Luke and I are most familiar with the sandbox on, so we were feeling pretty optimistic about this run. Starting things off, Savo Highway is a level that already has achievements for beating it without a vehicle, so this one's pretty easy. It's just a pretty long hike, and you want to make sure you watch out for choppers that will run you over at every chance they get. The Storm is another level that actually starts you off in a vehicle in a scripted sequence, but as soon as it gave us the ability to jump out, we jumped out and walked through this level. Taking out the Scarab is easy once you actually know there's an elevator on this level, which is something that was newly discovered to us, even though a ton of people told us in our comment section on our other video that we were crazy that we never had noticed that elevator before, but still, this level is doable without getting in a vehicle. Moving on to the Ark, this level is quite a hike on foot, and when you get to the part where all the tanks are, you wish you had a tank because there's enemies everywhere, but you can run past them all and complete this level also while on foot. The hardest part on the Ark for sure though is that there is the Scarab at the end, and you're gonna have to land a pretty good grav lift throw to jump up on the Scarab and take it out if you're not going to use a vehicle's firepower to knock out the legs. Then we get to the Covenant, and this was a level we tried for hours trying to find a way to get around the flight section of this level, especially because there's a lot of glitches on this level that let you bypass certain checkpoints and load in different sections. The main sequence that we were worried about is the part where you get in the Hornet and essentially have to fly across the water to the third beacon, which would obviously disqualify us from completing Halo 3 without entering a vehicle. When we got to the section with the first beacon, our main method that we attempted was using a glitch that we discovered when looking for ways out of maps, where we could jump onto the upper platform and run up the cliff wall and trigger the second half of this level to load. By doing so, we could make our way down the mountain and try to backpedal through the level to see if we could enter the third beacon from there. This was a really long walk, and once we finally made it to the entrance, we were really disappointed to see that there's this psychedelic wall that blocks us from getting to the place where the third beacon tower would have been, making it impossible to get back around to the other side of the cliff, which would allow us to trigger the part of the level after the Hornet run. And honestly, we tried everything. We tried doing every type of glitch that we could, every type of rock run that we could, trying to get around the wall to get up to that tower. And while we think it could possibly be done with maybe a ghost boosting into the barrier, we couldn't test it because a ghost would also ruin this Halo run. So even though we made it to the end section of this level, we couldn't back travel to make the rest of the level trigger and do the level in the correct order, so we kind of were stuck. We ended up backpedaling and reverting the last checkpoint, going back to the Hornets to see if maybe there was something we could come up with to get the Hornet to fly through without flying in the Hornet. We tried climbing up the mountain in any spot we could to see if we could get some sort of pathway that could allow us to walk the distance, but there was nothing really out there that would let us walk that far. We tried messing around with the water spawns to see if there was anything we could do to maybe avoid death barriers in the water, but we still had no luck. Finally, I realized there was a pelican there that would fly forward later on. However, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to get the pelican to ever trigger when we needed it to fly forward. We did discover that there is a Hornet spawn that releases an invisible barrier once you jump in the Hornet, so we jumped in the Hornet and jumped out quickly to see if we could get any further from there, and we still had no luck. Honestly, maybe there's some crazy launch that we're not thinking of that could get us all the way from there way across to that tower on the other side of the mountain, but we're pretty sure that you cannot complete this level without at least getting in a flying vehicle. The rest of this level, however, can be completed without a driving vehicle, so we were pretty optimistic about about that. However, when we're looking to the next level, Halo, that is known for having one of the most intense driving runs of all time, this level's pretty much going to make or break the possibility of Halo 3 being completed partially without a vehicle. This was another one that we did an entire video on and spent hours upon hours figuring out the best method for getting through this entire run. And honestly, after a ton of trial and error, we realized that you could get so close to the final cutscene. However, while you can complete the run without a Warthog, we couldn't find a way to trigger the cutscene at the end of this run. Ultimately, there wouldn't be anything we could do. But then, not too long after we uploaded our video trying to do the Halo 3 run on foot, which is crazy by the way, our friends over at Termatius Trickosity went ahead and found a way to actually trigger the cutscene. Honestly, stupid Luke and I forgot of the very obvious and easy to pull off triple gravity hammer onto auto turret jump that they went ahead and did to activate the cutscene. I don't know why we didn't think of it. It's such an obvious thing to think about. But honestly, because they were able to pull this off, technically this level can be completed with the cutscene being activated without even stepping foot in a Warthog. You just need to have 4 people and a lot of dedication. So while Halo 3 was not an ultimate victory, we still have a partial victory in that you can beat Halo 3 without entering a Warthog or any other ground vehicle. You just need to get in the Hornet during that one section. Next up is Halo 3 ODST, and this is one that I was feeling pretty optimistic about just because when you scan through the levels, there's really nothing that should be too jarring or too much in our way of completion. Uplift Reserve, while it is quite a hike and one of the key driving levels, is possible to complete in full without getting in a vehicle. We actually tested out when we were doing the no shooting run if you can trigger the cutscene without getting in a vehicle, and sure enough, you can. So you don't need a vehicle even to trigger that last cutscene. And for the most part, ODST isn't too driving heavy. But then we got to Kikowani Station, and we did not expect to have to put so much time into one level to figure out what is and isn't possible, and honestly, this one was absolutely crazy. So this level is a Banshee escort level where you have to escort a Phantom with a Banshee and fly section to section throughout the city. However, because there's massive lakes in between each standing area, you can't cross from one section to the other without dying because of all the water, and without getting in a Banshee, you can't fly across. We tried jumping onto the platforms in the opening area of the level to the right side, hoping that we could maybe leap our way across and get to the far section to open the door for the Phantom, but honestly, there's just no practical way to get over there. We don't have the crazy skulls that were in Halo 2 and Halo 1. So then our next theory was if we could maybe find a way on top of the Phantom, we could ride the Phantom to the next section when they fly over there, and maybe from there we could open up the door and continue on. So we tried a ton of different methods, trying to see if maybe there was a way we could get on top of the Phantom. We tried jumping on top of blocks, pushing different vehicles together, making towers. We even tried standing on ODST's heads when they go inside the ship, hoping to give us enough of a launch to maybe land on top of the Phantom in one way or another. Honestly, none of this stuff worked, so we kind of were doomed with this ODST run despite there being no vehicles really too prominently spread throughout this game. We kind of were stuck here. But then I remembered that there is some weird things that go on in the physics when you get inside a vehicle. So what if we utilized our 1 second sitting in the vehicle rule to try to do some sort of weird launch? What we ended up doing was pushing the plasma batteries next to the Banshee that is parked in the opening section of the level, and if we moved quick enough before Mickey decided to jump into the Phantom, we could quickly stick the plasma battery, which would give us just enough of a fuse to jump in the Banshee and jump out and use the momentum from the explosion to launch ourselves with the Banshee in the air, giving us enough height to actually land on top of the Phantom. This was crazy, especially after hours of trying to come up with some sort of method needed to clear this level, but ultimately it at least got us one step closer to seeing if we could get any further on this level. Once I got on top of the Phantom, Luke respawned quickly and got up there with me, which is important because 2 players need to get to the second part of this level, so 1 player can drop down, open up the door, and the other player can stay on the Phantom as a respawn point to get us across each lake, especially because the respawns on this level are really tricky, only allowing players to respawn when you're in the indoor segments. Besides just trying to stay alive and land on the Phantom, you also have to deal with the fact that Mickey is literally the worst pilot I've ever seen in my life. You constantly feel like you're about to die because of the way he turns the Phantom. And if that's not hard enough, as you approach the entrance and exits to the hallway sections, Mickey slams the top of the Phantom into the door that you just opened up and essentially puts you in a very epic game of human Tetris where you have to line your body up perfectly with the very small entrance or else you'll be launched off the Banshee. This was really chaotic, not something you can really get good at. You just have to line yourself up and hope for the best and hope that Mickey doesn't randomly knock you off course and slide you off of the ship. The second open area was actually relatively easy to cross because I was still on top of the Phantom. However, once we got to the far section where we had to open up the next door, we ran into a pretty big problem that the Phantom sits just high enough where you can't land on the ground without falling to your death. We even tried to time running and jumping at the same time, where I would stand on Luke's head and jump off his head to see if that could break up the fall. It didn't work. We tried exploring the other platforms, seeing if we could break different items to use them as a makeshift bridge to get back to the main platform. That didn't work either. We even tried riding on top of the engineers, which doesn't work at all. Finally, after being stuck here for the longest time, we tried this weird method we didn't even think would work, where we both jumped and threw grenades, and hopefully the grenade that Luke threw before I hit the ground would explode at the same time as me hitting the ground, giving me enough of a counter momentum to slow my speed down and allow me to land without dying. And somehow this actually worked, and I survived the fall for the very first time. Honestly, we really don't have any idea how that actually worked or how we pulled it off, but it allowed us to open up the door and move on to the next area. We both walked our way through the hallway and got to the next open area, which had us stuck again because neither of us were on top of the Phantom at this point. So then we were back to the drawing board yet again because we knew we would need to have one of us remain on the Phantom if we were going to make this section work and be able to fly across again. So instead of both of us jumping and Luke throwing the grenade that would bounce me up, Luke would throw one grenade down, I would watch where it landed, and then I would jump off the Phantom and land on where it's supposed to explode at the right time, and hopefully we could trigger the explosion correctly, allowing me to survive the drop again. After a few tries, we actually pulled it off again, and I was able to open the door to allow the Phantom to move in. Now, since you can only respawn in the hallway section, after I opened up the door, I jumped into the water to kill myself to respawn back on the Phantom and make the ride. However, since I didn't go deep enough into the hallway, the Phantom never triggered the movement sequence and stayed floating out the door, waiting for one of us to trigger the hallway. Yeah, this was super frustrating, so we essentially had to reset yet again and pull off the jumping again, where I actually ran further in the hallway the next time to make it work out. During this time, Luke got progressively worse at throwing grenades. It was a really bad time for a while. But finally, after enough trial and error, I survived the landing yet again, was able to open the door and move on through to the next section with me respawning back on top of the Phantom yet again. From there, after all of that work, we had another large open section to clear. And this one was weird because we had it where they would fly the Phantoms in different directions randomly at different tries of this run. We don't really know what caused Mickey to choose to fly to the right or to the left, but whatever he tried doing, eventually he would get stuck and not want to move forward. This was really frustrating because after all of this work, we were getting really close to the end of the level. We just had one more room to go, which would lead us to the Scarab section, and then after that, it wouldn't be far until we beat the entire level. However, no matter what we tried to do, the Phantom wouldn't move up far enough to trigger the final section of the level or get us close enough to land where we could take out the Wraith that's shooting at us and open up the next door. While we thought that maybe if we blew up the engineer pods, it would do something to trigger the Phantom, but that didn't work, and ultimately what we found out required the Phantom to move forward is the Banshee crossing the line to the second half of the open area, and that would be the only thing that would actually trigger this next part to work. So technically, despite us getting this far in the level, we couldn't do anything that would trigger the Phantom to move forward, which would bring us along, unless we got in a Banshee, meaning that unfortunately, despite how close we got, Kikowani Station is not completable without flying a Banshee. This was definitely super heartbreaking, especially because we spent probably just as much time on this as we did learning the Halo runs on the Maw and Halo 3, but nonetheless, we now know that you can't beat the level unless there's something we're missing, but still, there's one level left to Halo 3 ODST, and it will answer whether or not you can complete Halo 3 ODST without a ground vehicle, which is Coastal Highway, and this level has a major escort section that expects you to drive a Warthog and drive a tank. Now, we know it's possible from achievements to beat this level without getting in a Warthog or a tank, but typically it requires you to at least be in a Ghost or a Mongoose, as you have to move fast enough to protect Dare and Virgil, who are in the garbage tank. And honestly, our method for this one was just to keep moving as fast as possible and shooting at the enemies the furthest away from us, because if we could aggro them to come after us instead of the tank, it at least gave the tank a couple extra seconds to survive before we could get close enough to actually protect it. We were really nervous about what would happen in this section as we got further along and as the enemies got harder, but fortunately we kind of did this system where we split up at certain times or stuck together at other times to trigger the enemies to aggro us instead of Virgil, and we were able to make it through all of the sections without the Oliphant messing up even one time, and that was something we were pretty happy about. So despite all of the problems we had on Kikowani Station, Halo 3 ODST can be completed without getting in a ground vehicle. However, it cannot be completed without a flying vehicle. So honestly, at this point, looking at Halos 1, 2, 3, and ODST, seems like you can beat them without ground vehicles relatively easily, with the exception of Halo 1, but those flying vehicles seem to be the biggest run enders. Nonetheless, we were moving on to Halo Reach, which right out the gate we knew would be absolutely impossible to beat without flying, as there's required flying levels and there's required sections in multiple levels where you ride in a vehicle, so this wouldn't be one that we could beat without flying, but we wanted to see nonetheless if we could complete it without jumping in a vehicle. Like we said, on the level Winter Contingency, while you can skip the trucks early on, there is a passenger section where you have to fly in the Falcon. We don't know if this necessarily counts, but since you're going to have to fly later on in New Alexandria and on the level where you're in the Saber, there's really nothing you can do here. On the level Tip of the Spear, you actually can complete this entire level without a Warthog, fortunately, and there's other levels along the way that you can also beat. Fortunately enough, since there's sprint added into a lot of these levels, if you're not in a vehicle, the walking part feels a lot better in Reach than it does in other games that you're expected to be in a vehicle in, but nonetheless, there was nothing that really ended up being a hold-off. And while there's a ton of enemies on Tip of the Spear with strong vehicles, you just have to run around and look for things like plasma launchers to help take out the enemies, and honestly, you can get through this whole thing without driving, but of course, there's another section that forces you to get in the Falcon to progress through the entire level. It loads the next part of the level, it's required, so there's nothing we can really do to even skip this part, not that it really mattered because there's a ton of other Falcon sections also in this game. But then we get to Pillar of Autumn, and this level requires you to drive a Mongoose with a short drive around a ton of enemies, and actually this is pretty easy to do. There's only one section that you really need the Mongoose for, which is a jump on the bridge, but actually if you take it slow and you pay attention to where you're jumping, you can actually just jump across the bridge without even having to do a grenade jump, meaning that you can actually beat all of Halo Reach without getting in a ground vehicle once again. However, it is a game that requires another flying vehicle no matter what. It really seems like we're striking out on finding this perfect Halo game, but we still had Halo 4 and Halo 5 left, and we were running running out of hope, but we were optimistic that maybe there'd be something specifically in Halo 5 that could help us, but maybe Halo 4 had something else that we weren't thinking of. Going into Halo 4, while we know there is a driving section in Requiem, we kind of had bigger concerns just because we know the layout that Halo 4 has ahead of us. On the level 4 runner, there is the first ever ghost driving run, and this was something we were optimistic at trying, but we were pretty sure would not be possible to begin with. The whole level falls apart really quickly, and there isn't much time to try to sprint through this course. Actually, if anything, we were surprised with how far we even were able to get as the level slowly falls apart based on how close you get to the next section. Towards the beginning of the run, there was one massive jump we had to do, and it was doable, and during this process, oddly enough, the game will randomly wipe you if you take too much time, and it just turns you into a rock. It's really bizarre, and then it blames the other player for doing it and gives you the option to betrayal boot them. Nonetheless, while we tried to make our sprint through this, there's a really big jump midway through the run, and no matter how many times we tried to leap our way across the gap, there really wasn't any way we could get close enough. There is some lowered gravity, so we noticed our hang time in the air was a little bit higher when we did attempt the jumps, but there was nothing we could do to get past it, and honestly, if you even try to get around or get out of the map in this section, the game will just wipe you by turning you into rocks. So unfortunately, Halo 4 is another game we have to chalk up to not being possible to complete, but what about flying? Well, the level shutdown requires players to jump in the Pelican, and while it kind of serves as a scripted sequence when you are in the Pelican, the second it let us jump out, we were flying through the air, and honestly, we got a lot further than we thought we could get on this level. Of course, nowhere close to landing on any of the platforms we needed to, but I mean, look at this distance we had. We were really impressed with that. Unfortunately, you don't have any ability to really steer yourself, so you kind of just have to play with your jetpack, but it was kind of fun nonetheless, even though we couldn't get past it. We honestly weren't too worried about getting past this part or if it was possible with some extreme measures, because also the final level in the game has a required flying section that you can't skip either way, meaning Halo 4 is another game that you absolutely cannot complete without a vehicle whatsoever. And then we get to Halo 5 Guardians, the last Halo game on this list, and honestly, our last chance if we are gonna somehow have a Halo game beginning to end that we can complete without getting in a vehicle. Now this one we were pretty optimistic about going into it because 343 Industries had implemented the new squad mechanic, which would in theory mean the levels could be built a little bit differently, allowing for players to possibly bypass all the vehicle sections going into it. Jumping into this, the main concern we were faced was with the level Blue Team, where there's the Banshee part at the end of the level where you have to destroy the vents. However, if you grab the Hydra cannon early enough in the level and keep it until you get to the vent part, you can actually shoot all the vents from a distance and actually destroy all of the vents that are scattered around. And there's a lot of vents, but there's actually enough ammo in different places to either get a rocket launcher or use the Hydra cannon to get through this level without getting in the Banshee. So our biggest concern was cleared, and now we just had to see what was coming up in the next parts of Halo 5 Guardians. Going into the level Glassed, honestly, we just ran past the Gun Goose and Warthog. Of course, it gets a little tricky when the Prometheans just take off in a Warthog and shoot you in the process, but you get used to it after a while. The tank part is a little tricky to get past just because there's a lot of firefights and we can't use vehicles, but this level was also completed without a vehicle. On the level Evacuation, the whole world is ending or something, and honestly, while the world is ending, there's no rush because you can just run past the vehicles and nothing will happen. You do have to watch out for crazy drivers who might run you over, but outside of that, you can beat this level also without getting in a vehicle. Reunion is a really interesting level because it looks like one of the levels that would require you to fly through the cliffs, but actually there's an achievement associated with beating the level without getting in a vehicle, and there is a pathway alongside the cliffs you can get, so you don't have to actually get in any vehicle here, and you can also complete this level without flying a vehicle. On the level Swords of St. Helios, you do get some mantises that drop, and as much fun as it would be to just run through this part and enjoy using a mantis, I skipped it, and it gets a little bit chaotic, but it's actually pretty survivable nonetheless. And then we got to the level Enemy Lines, and this level is interesting because for the first time ever, it has a section that actually expects you to get into a vehicle, and there is no real way around it based off of what they're expecting you to do. You get on a cliff and you're supposed to jump in a vehicle and fly into the Kraken to destroy the battery and then escape in a Banshee and fly off. Now, this had us optimistic that maybe there'd be a way around it, as the level does allow for quite a bit of clambering and glitching around on the rock walls. However, no matter how many times we tried to jump into various sections, leap across the map using the ground-bound mechanic that honestly lets you fly for a really long and hilarious amount of time, and even try to rotate around the sides of the Kraken to climb up the legs of the Kraken, there was no way we could actually get our way up. Unfortunately, the Kraken doesn't seem to have the polygons fully layered for platforming and climbing, so a lot of the time I would just clip through the legs when trying to climb up that way, and there was just no way to get up on the Kraken and get inside without flying a vehicle, which completely kills Halo 5 Guardians, making it impossible to complete this game without a flying vehicle. Now, moving forward to see if we can at least complete this game as a consolation prize without a regular driving vehicle, on the level Genesis, it's the final level that has something expected from you involving a vehicle, and it's a tank. So you can beat Halo 5 Guardians without a driving vehicle. However, flying will be required, which is disappointing to say the least. We honestly did think maybe there would be one Halo game out there that could be completed without both flying and driving. If any of them could maybe be broken, Halo 3 ODST's Kikowani Station still has me feeling like maybe there's some crazy trick to trigger those phantoms to move forward, but honestly, we have no idea how. But if any of you figure out how to complete Kikowani Station without a vehicle, please let us know, because this would be the only Halo game that maybe could be remotely possibly done. But otherwise, all the Halo games cannot be completed without using a vehicle in one way or another. But guys, if you enjoyed this video, we do a ton of challenges and checks on Halo just like this, so be sure to subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss the crazy stuff we do next. We also have a Discord if you have suggestions for us, link in the description down below, and follow us on Twitter at Rocket Elijah, that is me, or you can follow Luke, the person whose perspective you've seen most of the way through this video, and the guy who spends way too much time editing my voice. You can follow him at Rocket Sloth Luke. Alright guys, we'll see you all next time with a brand new video. Bye guys.